The dust on Main Street swirled into eddies that morning in August 1883, when Sienna Owens felt the world tilt sideways and the wooden planks of the boardwalk rushed up to meet her face. She had been standing outside the general store in Tonopah, Nevada, her last 3 pennies clutched in her palm, trying to decide if she should buy the heel of stale bread in the discount bin or save the coins for one more night at the boarding house. Then her vision went black around the edges, her knees buckled, and she crumpled like a rag doll onto the weathered boards. Tanner Vance had been loading supplies into his wagon when he heard the gasps from the cluster of townsfolk gathered near the store entrance. He turned just in time to see a young woman collapse, her faded blue dress pooling around her thin frame. Without hesitation, he dropped the sack of grain he had been carrying and strode across the street, his boots kicking up small clouds of Nevada dust with each step. The crowd parted for him, the way people always did for a man who owned the second-largest cattle ranch in Esmeralda County. He knelt beside her, and his breath caught in his chest. Even with her face pale as fresh cream and her lips nearly bloodless, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Dark hair spilled from beneath her worn bonnet, and her features held a delicate refinement that spoke of better days long past. But what struck him most was how light she felt when he scooped her into his arms. Too light. He could feel every ridge of her ribcage through the thin fabric of her dress. "Someone fetch Doc Miller," Tanner called out, though he was already walking toward his wagon with determined strides. "She is just some drifter who came through on the stage 2 weeks ago," Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house said with a sniff. "Been staying in the cheapest room, barely eating a thing. I told her yesterday she needed to pay up or move on." Tanner shot the woman a look that could freeze water in July. "Then I suppose it is fortunate I found her before she starved to death on your watch." He settled Sienna gently on the wagon bench and climbed up beside her, supporting her with one arm while he took the reins with his free hand. His ranch was 6 miles outside of town, and he urged his horses into a steady trot, holding the unconscious woman against his chest to keep her from sliding off the seat. She weighed almost nothing, and anger burned hot in his gut at the thought of anyone being so hungry in a land of plenty. The rolling V Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of high desert rangeland, with cattle grazing as far as the eye could see. The main house was a solid timber structure that Tanner had built himself 5 years ago when he was 23, after his father died and left him the ranch. It had seemed too big for one man then, and it still did now. But as he carried Sienna across the threshold, the empty rooms suddenly felt purposeful, as if they had been waiting all along for someone to fill them. His housekeeper, Rosa Martinez, looked up from the bread dough she was kneading and her eyes went wide. "Mr. Tanner, what happened?" "This woman fainted from hunger in town. I need you to prepare some broth, something light that will not upset her stomach, and draw a bath, warm but not hot. She needs tending." Rosa wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to follow his instructions while Tanner carried Sienna upstairs to the guest room. He laid her on the bed with a gentleness that surprised him, arranging her limbs so she would be comfortable when she woke. Her face still held that deathly pallor, and he could see the purple shadows beneath her eyes, the hollows in her cheeks that hunger had carved. He sat in the chair beside the bed and waited. Rosa brought up the broth and left it on the nightstand, along with a basin of cool water and a cloth. Tanner dipped the cloth and wrung it out, then dabbed it carefully against Sienna's forehead, her cheeks, her throat. After about 20 minutes, her eyelids began to flutter. When Sienna's eyes finally opened, they were the color of rich honey, flecked with gold that caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. She stared at him in confusion, then tried to sit up quickly. The movement made her sway, and Tanner gently pressed her shoulder back against the pillows. "Easy now," he said quietly. "You fainted in town. I am Tanner Vance. You are safe here at my ranch." "I do not understand." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Why would you bring me here? You do not even know me." "I know you were hungry enough to collapse on Main Street. That is all I needed to know." He reached for the bowl of broth. "Can you sit up if I help you? You need to get some food in you." She nodded slowly, and he slipped his arm behind her shoulders, helping her rise to a half-sitting position. He held the bowl while she took small, tentative sips of the warm liquid. Her hands trembled when she reached up to steady the bowl herself, and he noticed how thin her fingers were, how the skin seemed almost translucent. "Slowly," he cautioned. "Your stomach needs time to adjust." After she had managed about half the bowl, she pushed it away gently. "Thank you. I cannot manage more right now." "That is fine. You can have more later." He set the bowl aside and studied her face. "What is your name?" "Sienna Owens." She looked down at her hands, shame coloring her voice. "I suppose you heard Mrs. Henderson." "I am just some drifter with no prospects and no money." "I do not care what Mrs. Henderson says. She is a bitter woman who has never shown kindness to anyone in her life." Tanner leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "How long has it been since you had a proper meal?" Sienna's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back stubbornly. "I had a bowl of beans 3 days ago at the saloon. Before that, I cannot remember, maybe a week." "Where is your family?" "Dead." The word came out flat, emotionless, as if she had said it so many times it no longer held meaning. "My parents died of cholera in Kansas 2 years ago. I had a brother, but he was killed in a mining accident in Colorado last spring. I have been traveling west ever since, looking for work, looking for somewhere to start over. But every town is the same. No one wants to hire a woman with no references, no skills beyond reading and basic arithmetic." "You can read." Tanner's interest sharpened. "And you know arithmetic." "My father was a schoolteacher back in Ohio before we moved west. He taught me everything he knew." A ghost of pride flickered across her face. "I can read Latin and Greek, and I know Shakespeare by heart. Not that any of that matters when you are trying to find honest work in a mining town." Tanner sat back, an idea forming in his mind. "I have a proposition for you, Sienna Owens. I need someone to manage the accounts for the ranch. My foreman, Jack Cooper, is good with cattle but terrible with numbers. I have been doing the books myself, but I am always behind and I make mistakes. If you are as good with arithmetic as you say, the job is yours. I will pay you fair wages, and you will have room and board here at the main house." She stared at him as if he had just offered her the moon. "You cannot be serious. You do not even know if I am telling the truth about my skills." "Can you prove it? Give me your books and I will show you." He smiled for the first time since carrying her through his front door. "I will. But not today. Today you rest and eat. Rosa will bring you more broth in a few hours, and tomorrow we can discuss the details." He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "Sienna, I want you to understand something. You are not a charity case. I genuinely need help with the ranch accounts, and if you can do the job, you will earn every penny I pay you. But more than that, no one should ever go hungry when there is food to be had. As long as you are under my roof, you will never miss another meal. That is a promise." The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, tracking silent paths down her pale cheeks. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know anything about me. I know you were willing to starve rather than steal. I know you have been dealt a hard hand by life and you are still fighting. That is enough for me." He tipped his hat to her. "Get some rest, Miss Owens. We will talk more tomorrow." He left her there and went downstairs, where Rosa was waiting with questions in her eyes. Is she going to be all right, Mr. Tanner? I think so, with some good food and rest. She will be staying here, Rosa. I offered her a job managing the ranch accounts. Rosa's eyebrows shot up. You offered her a job. You just met her. I know. Tanner walked to the window and looked out at his land, at the cattle dotting the hillsides like scattered stones. But something tells me she is meant to be here. Call it instinct. Over the following days, Sienna slowly regained her strength. Rosa fussed over her like a mother hen, bringing her small meals every few hours, starting with broths and soups and gradually introducing more substantial fare. Tanner visited her room each evening after finishing his work on the ranch, sitting in the chair beside her bed and talking with her about everything and nothing. He learned that she was 20 years old, 3 years younger than him. She had grown up in a small town in Ohio where her father taught at the local school and her mother took in sewing. They had moved west when she was 16, hoping for better opportunities, but instead found only hardship. Her father had worked as a clerk in a Kansas dry goods store, and her mother had continued sewing, but they barely scraped by. When the cholera epidemic swept through their town, both parents had died within days of each other. Sienna had lived with her brother Marcus after that, following him from town to town as he sought work in various mines. He had been trying to save enough money to buy a small farm where they could settle down, but a cave-in at a silver mine in Colorado had crushed those dreams along with his body. She told Tanner all of this in a calm, measured voice, as if reciting facts from a history book rather than the tragedies that had shaped her life. But he saw the pain behind her honey-colored eyes, the grief she carried like a weight on her shoulders. I am sorry for all you have lost, he said quietly one evening as the sun set beyond his window, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I have learned that sorry does not change anything, Sienna replied, though her tone held no bitterness. But thank you for saying it. Most people do not bother. Tell me something happy, Tanner said on impulse. Something from before all the loss. What did you love doing when you were a girl? A smile transformed her face, chasing away the shadows. Reading. I would climb up into this old oak tree behind our house with a book, and I would stay there for hours. My mother would call for me to come help with supper, but I would pretend not to hear because I was so lost in whatever story I was reading. What kind of stories did you like? Adventures, mostly. Tales of far-off places and brave heroes. I loved the Odyssey and the Three Musketeers and anything by Sir Walter Scott. She laughed softly. I used to imagine I was a knight on a quest or a sailor exploring uncharted seas. Silly childhood dreams. Not silly, Tanner said firmly. Everyone needs dreams. What were yours? She turned the question back on him, her eyes curious. I wanted this ranch to be the best in Nevada. I wanted to breed cattle that could thrive in this desert climate, strong enough to survive the harsh summers and cold winters. I wanted to build something that would last, something I could be proud of. He paused, considering his next words, and I wanted to find someone to share it with. But that second dream has been harder to achieve than the first. I find that hard to believe, Sienna said. A successful rancher like you must have women lining up from here to Carson City. Tanner shook his head. The women in town see my land and my cattle, and they think they want me. But what they really want is security, comfort, not the man himself. I always felt like I was being measured for how well I could provide, not for who I actually am. He met her gaze. You are the first person in a long time who looks at me and seems to see just a man, not a ranch owner. Perhaps that is because you saved my life, Sienna said softly. It is hard to see someone as anything other than good when they carried you home and made sure you would never go hungry again. The air between them seemed charged suddenly, heavy with words unspoken. Tanner cleared his throat and stood. "Well, you should rest. Tomorrow, if you are feeling up to it, I will show you the account books. Fair warning, they are a mess." "I look forward to the challenge," Sienna said, and the smile she gave him made something warm unfold in his chest. True to his word, Tanner brought her the ranch ledgers the next morning. Sienna was dressed and downstairs for the first time, wearing a fresh dress that Rosa had altered to fit her thin frame. She still looked too pale, too fragile, but there was color returning to her cheeks and a spark of life in her eyes that had been missing before. She settled at the big oak desk in Tanner's study and opened the first ledger. Her expression shifted from interest to concentration to barely concealed horror as she flipped through the pages. "Tanner," she said after about an hour of silent review, "when was the last time you reconciled these accounts?" He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "Reconciled. Balanced the income against the expenses. Tracked which cattle were sold and for how much. Accounted for all the costs of running the ranch." "I write down the important numbers," he offered weakly. "You write down some numbers," she corrected, though her tone held more amusement than criticism. "Half of these entries are incomplete. You have income listed with no source, expenses with no explanation, and your arithmetic is, forgive me for saying so, atrocious. You underpaid yourself by nearly $300 last quarter alone." $300. Tanner stared at her. "That cannot be right. I will show you." For the next 2 hours, Sienna walked him through the ledgers, pointing out errors, explaining concepts he had never fully understood. Her fingers flew across the pages, making quick calculations that he struggled to follow. She was patient with his questions, breaking down complicated ideas into simple terms. Watching her work, Tanner felt a sense of awe. This woman who had been near death less than a week ago was now utterly transformed, her whole being alight with purpose and competence. She was brilliant, he realized, absolutely brilliant, and she had been wasting away in a boarding house, unable to find work because people could not see past the fact that she was a woman. "You are hired," he said when she finally closed the last ledger. "Full-time, with a salary of $50 a month plus room and board." Sienna's jaw dropped. $50. "Tanner, that is far too generous. I was expecting maybe 20. You just found $300 I did not know I had. I would say you have already proven you are worth every penny." He held out his hand. "Do we have an agreement, Miss Owens?" She looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she reached out and clasped his hand firmly. "We have an agreement, Mr. Vance." "Tanner," he corrected. "If we are going to be working together, we should use first names." "All right then, Tanner." The way she said his name, soft and warm, sent a pleasant shiver down his spine. Over the following weeks, Sienna threw herself into organizing the ranch accounts with an intensity that impressed everyone who witnessed it. She created new systems for tracking everything from cattle sales to feed costs to the wages paid to the ranch hands. She corresponded with buyers in San Francisco and Denver, negotiating better prices for Tanner's beef. She even identified a buyer who had been shorting them on weight for over a year, saving the ranch hundreds of dollars. But more than her work, it was Sienna herself who transformed the rolling V. Her presence brought life to the big house in ways Tanner had not anticipated. She would sit in the parlor in the evenings, reading aloud from books she borrowed from the small library in town. Her voice brought characters to life, made distant places seem real. Rosa would stop her work to listen, and even Jack Cooper, the gruff foreman, found excuses to linger in the house when Sienna was reading. Tanner found himself watching her constantly, mesmerized by the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way she bit her lower lip when she was working through a difficult calculation, the way her whole face lit up when she laughed at something Rosa said. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him one morning as he watched her in the study, surrounded by ledgers and papers, completely absorbed in her work. She had filled out in the weeks since he brought her home, her face no longer gaunt, her body regaining the curves that hunger had stolen. But it was not her physical recovery that moved him. It was her spirit, her fierce intelligence, her quiet strength. It was the way she treated everyone on the ranch with respect, from Tanner himself down to the newest ranch hand. It was the kindness she showed to the animals, the joy she took in simple pleasures like a beautiful sunset or a cup of good coffee. He loved her, and the knowledge terrified him because he had no idea if she felt anything for him beyond gratitude. Sienna was acutely aware of Tanner's attention, though she tried not to let herself hope it meant what she desperately wanted it to mean. She had been at the Rolling V for 2 months now, and every day she found new reasons to admire the man who had saved her life. He was unfailingly kind, but not soft. He ran his ranch with a firm but fair hand, demanding hard work from his men but paying them well and treating them with respect. He was patient with the animals, skilled with rope and horse, and surprisingly well-read for a cattleman. She had discovered a collection of books in his room, everything from agricultural manuals to poetry, and they spent many evenings discussing literature and philosophy. But what drew her most was the way he looked at her, as if she was something precious and rare. No one had ever looked at her that way before, and when he smiled at her, his whole face softening, she felt something flutter in her chest like a caged bird beating its wings. She tried to remind herself that she was his employee, that he had given her this opportunity out of kindness, not romantic interest. She tried not to read too much into the casual touches, his hand on her shoulder when he looked over her work, his fingers brushing hers when he passed her a book. She tried not to notice how her heart raced when he entered a room, or how she found excuses to stay up late so she could spend a few more minutes in his company. But she was fighting a losing battle against her own heart. The turning point came on a cold October evening. An early winter storm had blown in from the mountains, bringing wind and rain that lashed at the windows. Tanner had been out checking on the cattle, making sure they had adequate shelter, and he returned to the house soaked through and shivering. Sienna was in the study, working late on the quarterly reports, when she heard him come in. She went to the hallway and found him dripping on the floorboards, his teeth chattering. "Good Lord, Tanner, you are freezing," she hurried to him, her hands fluttering uselessly. "Go change into dry clothes immediately. I will have Rosa heat some water for tea." "Rosa went to bed hours ago," Tanner said through chattering teeth. "And you should have too. What are you still doing up?" "Never mind that. Can you make it upstairs on your own, or do you need help?" "I can manage." But he swayed on his feet, and Sienna immediately ducked under his arm, supporting his weight. "Stop being stubborn and let me help you." Together, they made it up the stairs and to his room. Sienna had never been inside before, and she tried not to stare at the personal space that was so essentially him. Simple furniture, well made but unadorned. Books stacked on every available surface. A window that looked out over the ranch lands he loved. "I will be fine from here," Tanner said, but his hands were shaking too hard to work the buttons on his soaked shirt. "You cannot even unbutton your shirt." Sienna made a decision and stepped forward. "Turn around." "Sienna, you should not. I am not leaving you to freeze to death because of propriety. Now turn around." He obeyed, and she began working the buttons free from behind him, trying to ignore the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. the way his breath hitched when her hands brushed against him. When she had the shirt open, she helped him shrug out of it, then immediately wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "Can you manage the rest yourself?" she asked, keeping her eyes firmly on his face. "Yes." His voice was rough. "Thank you." She nodded and turned to leave, but his hand shot out and caught her wrist. "Sienna, wait." She looked back at him, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Yes, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right moment, but there is never a right moment for something like this." He took a shaky breath. "I am in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you lying on that boardwalk, but it has grown every day since. The way you laugh, the way you lose yourself in your work, the way you care about everyone around you. You are the bravest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Sienna stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You love me, with everything I am." He stood, the blanket falling from his shoulders, seeming not to notice that he was half-dressed and still shivering. "I know I am just a rancher with dirt under his fingernails and too many responsibilities. I know you could probably find someone better, someone who could give you a life in a real city with theaters and culture. But I can give you a home and my heart, and a promise that I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. Oh, Tanner." Her voice broke on his name. "Do you really think I could find someone better than the man who saved my life, who gave me purpose and dignity when I had nothing? Do you think I could want anything more than this ranch, this wild, beautiful land, and you?" She stepped closer to him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you too. I have been trying so hard not to, because I thought you could never see me as anything more than someone you helped out of pity. But I love you, Tanner Vance, with all my heart." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and fierce all at once. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, her fingers tangling in his damp hair. He tasted like rain and promise, and she poured everything she felt into that kiss, all the love and longing and hope she had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tanner rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Sienna. I know it is fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me and be my wife, my partner in all things." "Yes." She laughed through the tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her again and again, as if he could not quite believe she was real. "I will get you a proper ring in town. We can have the wedding whenever you want. Invite whoever you want." "I do not care about any of that," Sienna interrupted. "All I care about is starting our life together. We could get married tomorrow and I would be the happiest woman in Nevada." "Tomorrow might be a bit ambitious," Tanner said with a laugh, "but soon, as soon as we can arrange it." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Tonopah. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious to see the woman who had captured the heart of their most eligible bachelor. Sienna wore a simple but elegant dress that Rosa had helped her make, white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Tanner had ridden miles to find. When she walked down the aisle toward him, Tanner felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was radiant, her dark hair crowned with flowers, her honey-colored eyes bright with joy. This woman, who had been near death just months ago, was now vibrant and alive in his. The miracle of it overwhelmed him. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through all the days to come. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tanner kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed half the county. Rosa had outdone herself, preparing a feast that included roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the ranch garden, and 3 different kinds of pie. The ranch hands had strung up lanterns, and as the sun set, they glowed like captured stars. Tanner and Sienna danced their first dance as husband and wife under those lanterns, swaying to the music of a fiddle player Tanner had hired from Virginia City. She fit perfectly in his arms, her head resting against his chest, and he thought he had never been happier. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "I am thinking about how close I came to losing you before I ever met you. If I had gone into town an hour later that day, if I had not happened to look over at the right moment." He tightened his arms around her. "The thought terrifies me. But you did go into town at exactly the right time. You did look over at exactly the right moment. Maybe it was fate." She tilted her head back to look up at him. "I used to think my life was nothing but tragedy and loss. But all of it, every terrible thing that happened, led me to that boardwalk in Tonopah, to you. And if I could go back and change any of it, I would not, because it might mean I never found you. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that," Tanner promised, and kissed her there under the lanterns, surrounded by their friends and the life they were building together. Their first year of marriage was everything Sienna had never dared to dream. She and Tanner settled into a partnership that was as much about running the ranch as it was about love. She continued managing the accounts, but she also learned the practical side of ranching, riding out with Tanner to check on the herds, helping with the spring calving, even learning to rope cattle under the amused tutelage of Jack Cooper. Tanner, in turn, let her teach him about art and literature and all the things he had never had time to appreciate. They read together in the evenings, discussed books and ideas, debated philosophy and politics. She expanded his world and he grounded hers. But it was the small moments that Sienna treasured most. Waking up wrapped in Tanner's arms, warm and safe. Cooking breakfast together on Rosa's days off, laughing when he inevitably burned the eggs. Walking hand in hand across their land at sunset, talking about their dreams for the future. Falling asleep each night to the sound of his heartbeat, knowing she was loved completely and without reservation. In the spring of 1885, Sienna discovered she was pregnant. She told Tanner one evening after supper, simply blurting it out because she was too excited to find a more elegant way to share the news. "I am going to have a baby." Tanner, who had been reading a letter from a cattle buyer in San Francisco, dropped the paper and stared at her. "You are?" "We are." "Really?" She nodded, beaming. "Really. Rosa helped me figure it out. The baby should come in late October." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel him trembling with emotion. Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled back and cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You have given me so much already, Sienna, more than I ever dreamed of having, and now this. I do not have the words for what I feel right now." "Then show me," she whispered, and he did, kissing her with a reverence that made her heart overflow. The pregnancy was not easy. Sienna suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first months, barely able to keep down food. Tanner fretted over her constantly, bringing her weak tea and dry toast, holding her hair back when she was ill, rubbing her feet when they swelled. He treated her like she was made of spun glass, until she finally had to sit him down and remind him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time. "I know," he said, looking sheepish. "But those women were not you. I cannot stand seeing you in discomfort." "It will pass," she assured him, "and it will all be worth it when we hold our child." She was right. The sickness faded after the 4th month and Sienna bloomed. She had never felt more alive, more connected to the earth and the rhythms of nature. She worked in the ranch garden, planting vegetables and herbs. She sewed baby clothes, tiny garments that made Tanner's eyes mist over when he saw them. She nested, turning the room next to theirs into a nursery, painting it herself over Tanner's protests. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she reminded him, "and I want our baby's first room to be perfect." On a cool October evening, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sienna's labor began. Tanner had sent for the midwife weeks ago, and the woman arrived within an hour, calm and capable. But nothing could have prepared Tanner for the reality of watching his wife in pain, hearing her cry out, seeing her struggle. He held her hand through it all, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement and love. "You are so strong," he told her. "So brave, I am in awe of you, if you ever want to do this again," Sienna panted between contractions. "You are going to have to carry the baby yourself." He laughed despite his worry. "It is a deal." After 12 hours of labor, as the first light of dawn was breaking over the Nevada hills, their son came into the world. He had a shock of dark hair like his mother and his father's strong features, and he announced his arrival with a lusty cry that made everyone in the room laugh with relief. "You have a fine, healthy boy," the midwife said, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a soft blanket before placing him in Sienna's arms. Sienna looked down at her son, at this tiny, perfect human she and Tanner had created, and felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Tanner knelt beside the bed, his arm around Sienna, his finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you for this gift, Sienna. Thank you for everything." They named him Thomas, after Tanner's father, with the middle name Owen in honor of Sienna's family. Little Thomas was a happy baby, easy-going and quick to smile. He had his mother's honey-colored eyes and his father's stubborn determination, a combination that promised to be both delightful and challenging as he grew. The ranch thrived under their joint stewardship. Sienna's careful management of the accounts allowed them to expand, buying adjacent land and increasing their herds. Tanner's expertise as a cattleman and his reputation for fair dealing brought buyers from all over the West. Within 3 years, the Rolling V had become the largest and most successful ranch in Esmeralda County. But success never changed who they were at their core. They remained humble, generous with their workers, active in their community. When drought hit the region in 1887, they extended credit to neighboring ranchers who were struggling. When a fire destroyed the school in Tonopah, they donated money to rebuild it and bought books for the new library. "You remember what it was like to have nothing," Tanner said when Sienna questioned if they were giving away too much. "So do I. We have been blessed with good fortune. The least we can do is share it." They had 2 more children in the following years. Their daughter, Sarah, was born in 1887, a quiet, contemplative child who loved books just like her mother. Their youngest, a boy they named Theodore, arrived in 1889. He was pure mischief from the moment he learned to crawl, keeping everyone on their toes. Sienna often found herself pausing in the midst of her busy days, overcome by the strange miracle of her life. She would watch Tanner teaching Thomas how to rope a calf, or see Sarah curled up in the window seat with a book, or hear Theodore's laughter echoing through the house, and she would think about the girl she had been. That desperate, hungry young woman who had collapsed on a boardwalk, certain her story was ending. She had been wrong. Her story had only been beginning. One evening in the summer of 1890, 7 years after that fateful day in town, Sienna stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the land she and Tanner had built together. The children were in bed, exhausted from a day of playing, and Rosa had gone home to her own family. It was just her and Tanner, sitting side by side on the porch swing he had built, his arm around her shoulders. "You ever think about that day?" Tanner asked quietly. "The day we met." "All the time," Sienna admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if you had not been there. I think about how close I came to giving up entirely. I think about it too. I think about what would have happened if I had been too wrapped up in my own concerns to notice you fall, if I had just walked past like everyone else." He pulled her closer. "It terrifies me." "But you did not walk past. You stopped and you cared and you changed everything." She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "You gave me more than food and shelter, Tanner. You gave me back my life. You gave me purpose and love and a future I never thought I would have. You gave me this family, this home, this beautiful life." "You gave me all of that too," Tanner said softly. "I had land and cattle and success, but I did not have a reason for any of it, not until you. You made everything matter. You turned a house into a home, a ranch into a legacy, a lonely man into the happiest husband and father in Nevada." "We saved each other," Sienna said and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Yes," Tanner agreed, resting his forehead against hers. "We did." They sat there as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, comfortable in the silence of two people who knew each other completely. Somewhere in the house, one of the children murmured in their sleep. The cattle lowed softly in the distant pastures. A coyote called from the hills, wild and free. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a tall, serious young man who was clearly born to be a rancher. He learned everything his father could teach him, and by the time he was 16, he was running his own string of cattle on the northern section of the ranch. Sarah surprised everyone by developing a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the stark beauty of the Nevada landscape in images that took Sienna's breath away. Theodore remained the family wild card, equally likely to be found reading poetry in the barn or racing his horse across the open range. The ranch continued to prosper. Tanner expanded into horse breeding, and the Rolling V became known throughout the West for producing exceptional cutting horses. Sienna wrote articles about ranch management for agricultural journals, sharing the techniques she had developed. Younger ranchers came from miles around to learn from them, and they were always generous with their knowledge. They faced hardships too. A harsh winter in 1893 killed a quarter of their cattle. Sarah developed pneumonia that same year and nearly died before pulling through. Theodore broke his arm falling from a horse. But they weathered every storm together, their love and partnership only growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. In the summer of 1898, Thomas fell in love with a young woman named Emma Patterson, the daughter of a rancher from the next county over. Sienna watched her son court Emma with the same steady determination his father had shown, and she felt a bittersweet mixture of joy and nostalgia. "He is so young," she said to Tanner one night as they prepared for bed. "He is 20, Tanner pointed out. "I was only 3 years older when I married you, and I was only 20. Good Lord, we were children ourselves," but she smiled at the memory. "The best decision I ever made was saying yes to you. The best decision I ever made was stopping my wagon and picking up a beautiful woman who had fainted on Main Street," Tanner countered, pulling her into his arms. "Everything good in my life started with that moment." They gave Thomas and Emma their blessing, and the young couple was married that fall in the same church where Sienna and Tanner had spoken their vows. Watching Thomas marry the woman he loved, seeing the way he looked at Emma with such devotion, Sienna felt her heart swell with pride. They had raised him well, she and Tanner. They had taught him what love looked like, and he had found it for himself. Thomas and Emma built a house on the eastern section of the ranch, and within a year, they had given Sienna and Tanner their first grandchild, a beautiful baby girl named Lucy. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sienna was struck by the continuity of it all. This child was the future they had built, the legacy of love that would go on long after she and Tanner were gone. More grandchildren followed as the years passed. Sarah married a doctor from Reno and gave them 2 grandsons. Theodore, true to form, surprised everyone by falling for a schoolteacher from California and moving to San Francisco, though he visited often with his growing family. As Sienna and Tanner moved into their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting Thomas take over more of the management. But they remained active, still riding out to check the herds, still involved in every major decision. The ranch was their life's work, and they could not imagine truly stepping away. On a warm August evening in 1908, 25 years to the day after Sienna had fainted on that boardwalk, Tanner took her hand and led her into town. She was puzzled at first, not understanding why he was so insistent they go, until he stopped in front of the general store. "You remember?" he asked softly. Sienna looked around and suddenly she could see it all. The exact spot on the boardwalk where she had collapsed. The wagon where Tanner had been loading supplies, the place where their story had begun. "I remember being so hungry I could barely think straight," she said. "I remember feeling like I had reached the end of everything, and then I woke up and you were there and everything changed." Tanner reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sienna's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a beautiful gold ring with a honey-colored stone that matched her eyes perfectly. "I promised you a proper ring 25 years ago," Tanner said. "Life got busy and I never got around to it, but I saw this in a jeweler's window in Reno last month, and I knew it was meant for you." He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger, next to the simple gold band she had worn since their wedding. 25 years ago, I promised to make sure you never went hungry again. I promised to love you and cherish you for the rest of my life. I have kept those promises, and I intend to keep them for however many years we have left." Sienna's eyes filled with tears. "You have kept every promise and more. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You gave me love and home and family. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Tanner said, pulling her close. "Every single day with you has been a gift." They stood there on that boardwalk, in the spot where Sienna had fallen and Tanner had caught her, and they kissed like newlyweds. Passers-by smiled and nodded, recognizing the couple who had become legends in their own right. The rancher who had rescued a starving woman and made her his wife. The woman who had taken a struggling ranch and helped turn it into an empire. The love story that had started with an act of kindness and grown into something beautiful and enduring. As they walked back to their wagon hand in hand, Sienna looked up at the man beside her. His hair was more gray than brown now, and there were lines around his eyes and mouth that had not been there when they met. But to her, he was as handsome as he had been that first day. More so because she knew him now. She knew every facet of his character, every strength and flaw. And she loved him more deeply than she had ever thought possible to love another person. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" Tanner asked. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for caring when no one else did, for loving me when I could not love myself." She squeezed his hand. "For never letting me go hungry again, in any sense of the word." You fed my body, my mind, my heart, my soul. You have filled my life so completely that there is no room for anything but joy." Tanner stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "Sienna Vance, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every morning I wake up grateful that I went into town that day, grateful that I looked over at the right moment, grateful for every single second I have been given with you. We have been so blessed," Sienna whispered. "More than blessed," Tanner agreed. "We have been loved, and that makes all the difference." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. Their children and grandchildren were gathered on the porch, waiting to surprise them with an anniversary celebration. There was food and music and laughter, 3 generations of family coming together to honor the love that had started it all. As Sienna looked around at the faces of everyone she held dear, as she felt Tanner's arm around her waist and heard her grandchildren's laughter ringing through the evening air, she thought about the girl she had been. That lost, desperate young woman who had thought she had nothing left to live for. If she could go back and speak to that girl, what would she say? That life could change in an instant. That kindness from a stranger could alter everything. That love, real love, was worth waiting for, worth believing in, worth fighting for. That the darkest moments could give way to the most beautiful dawns. But most of all, she would tell that girl to hold on. Just hold on a little longer. Because sometimes, when you think your story is ending, it is actually just beginning. Years continued to pass, gentle and full. Sienna and Tanner moved into their 60s, then their 70s, growing old together in the house they had filled with love and laughter. Their bodies slowed, but their minds remained sharp, and their love only deepened with time. Thomas took over complete control of the ranch, running it with the same combination of integrity and skill that his parents had taught him. The Rolling V continued to thrive under his leadership, growing from generation to generation. Sarah's son became a lawyer in Carson City, arguing cases and making a name for himself. Theodore's children scattered across the West, each finding their own path, but they always came home for the holidays. Sienna published a book in 1915, a memoir of her early days in the West and how she had built a life from nothing. It became a surprise success, inspiring women across the country. She received letters from widows and orphans, from women who had lost everything and did not know how to go on. She answered every single one, sharing her story and her hope. Tanner's health began to fail in the spring of 1920. He had been slowing down for years, but suddenly he could no longer deny that his body was giving out. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out from a lifetime of hard work and long days. He had maybe a year, possibly less. Sienna refused to cry in front of him, refused to let him see her fear. Instead, she treasured every moment, making sure he knew how loved he was. They spent their days sitting on the porch together, holding hands and watching the land they had built together. They talked about everything and nothing, remembering their life, celebrating all they had shared. "I am not afraid," Tanner told her one evening as the sun set in a blaze of color. "I have lived a full life. I have loved and been loved. I have watched my children grow and thrive. I have built something that will last. What more could a man ask for?" "More time," Sienna said, her voice breaking. "I want more time with you. We have had 47 years, my love. 47 years more than I ever dreamed I would have with someone like you." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "When my time comes, do not grieve too long. Live. Keep loving, keep laughing, keep filling the world with your light. Promise me." "I cannot promise that," Sienna whispered. "You are asking me to live without my heart." "No, I am asking you to remember that you are stronger than you know. You survived starvation and loss and crushing poverty. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Sienna. You will survive this too. Tanner passed away on a cool October morning, surrounded by his family, with Sienna holding his hand. His last words were for her. Thank you for 47 years of happiness. I will wait for you wherever I am going. Do not rush to follow, but know that I will be waiting. She kissed him one last time, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, I love you. I will always love you. The grief was overwhelming at first. Sienna felt like half of herself had been torn away, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. But she remembered her promise to Tanner, and she held on. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support. Rosa, now elderly herself, stayed by her side through the darkest days. Slowly, painfully, Sienna learned to live with the loss. She threw herself into her writing, publishing articles and essays about ranch life, about love and loss, about the resilience of the human spirit. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories of Tanner and the life they had built together. She never remarried. How could she, when her heart still belonged to the man who had saved her life all those years ago? On a warm August evening in 1925, 42 years to the day after Tanner had carried her home from Tonopah, Sienna sat on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land they had loved together. She was 82 years old now, her hair white as snow, her body frail and tired. But her mind was clear, and her heart was full of memories. Thomas sat beside her, holding her hand. He was 57 now, a grandfather himself, the solid, responsible man she and Tanner had raised him to be. Tell me about the day you met Papa, he said, as he had asked her to do countless times over the years. Sienna smiled and began the story again, her voice soft but steady. She told him about being hungry and desperate, about collapsing on the boardwalk, about waking up in a strange house to find herself being cared for by a kind rancher with gentle hands and eyes full of compassion. She told him about falling in love, about building a life together, about 47 years of partnership and joy and love so deep it transcended death itself. He saved my life that day, Sienna finished. But more than that, he gave me a reason to live. He taught me what love could be. And every day since, I have been grateful for the kindness of a stranger who became the love of my life. He loved you so much, Thomas said quietly. We all knew it. Everyone who saw you together knew it. I loved him too, I still do. Sienna closed her eyes and felt the evening breeze on her face. For just a moment, she could imagine it was Tanner's touch. I will see him again soon, I think. I am ready. Mama, do not say that. It is all right. I have lived a long, beautiful life. I have loved and been loved. I have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I have seen the ranch grow beyond my wildest dreams. I have fulfilled every promise I made and done everything I set out to do. She squeezed his hand. Your papa is waiting for me. It is time for me to go home. Sienna Vance passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 nights later, a smile on her face, surrounded by the family she and Tanner had created. She was buried beside him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a simple headstone that read, Sienna Vance, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was never hungry again. The Rolling V Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, a living legacy of the love between a rancher and the woman he had saved. And every year on that August anniversary, the family gathered at the graves on the hillside and told the story again. The story of how Tanner Vance had seen a woman faint from hunger in town, had carried her home, and had never let her go hungry again. The story of how an act of kindness had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth cherishing. Because at its heart, it was about more than survival or success, or even romance. It was about the transformative power of compassion, about how one person choosing to care could change everything. It was about love in its truest, purest form, the kind of love that nourishes not just the body but the soul. And it was a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, no matter how hungry or lost or desperate we might feel, there is always hope. Always the possibility of a stranger who stops to help, a hand reaching down to pull us up, a new beginning waiting just around the corner. For Sienna and Tanner, that new beginning had started on a dusty boardwalk in Tonopah, Nevada, in the summer of 1883. And from that single moment of kindness, a love story for the ages had been born.